Thought it'd be a good idea to get some perspective on some of the basketball. Well, Mason Jones, Isaiah Joe, some of the prospects as the NBA draft is going to happen at some point here when things resume. So for that, we bring in Bryan Kalbrosky from hoopshype.com, part of USA Today Sports. Bryan joins us on the Williams Tractor Hotline. Hi, Bryan. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm always looking forward to talking about Mason Jones. That's somebody whose game I really, really believe in. I think that after getting to know him, through my interview and then really getting a chance to chat with him, I think that he's got a bright future in the NBA.
Well, and we'll pivot to him here in a moment, but I'm curious how league executives are scouting, are preparing for whenever the draft will be, since the whole calendar has been upended due to this pandemic. No workouts, stuff, combine has been moved, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think realistically, you're getting a lot of people who are doing mostly Skype interviews right now. I think, obviously, team workouts are a huge part of the draft process, and obviously that plays a huge role in the evaluation of a player. But right now, they're doing whatever they can to get a hold of these guys and just getting to them as people first. I think eventually you might be able to get them into gyms. But, even at Portsmouth Invitational Combine for seniors and even at the NBA Combine, a big portion of what you're going to end up coming away from that with is experience getting to know a player. And I think that they're using a lot of, Zoom calls and Skype calls right now, same way the rest of us are, just to get to know these prospects as people. And I think that one thing that is so important about this is it's really a job interview, and the more you talk to these people, the more you get to know them. The more you learn about them, the more you might like somebody or not like somebody. And I think you can really get a lot of information and intel from somebody in those calls. And I think that players who come across as well-spoken and informed of what their game is and what their game could be are going to rise as the draft continues. So I think a lot of guys who come off well at an interview environment, and obviously you see that in pressers and stuff, who's good at those and who might not be. Those are the guys you're going to keep hearing from during all of this.
What is it specifically? We'll pivot to Mason Jones here. You had a pretty lengthy interview with him, and when you look at some of the NBA mock drafts, there's some where he's kind of on the periphery looking, he's on the outside looking in at the draft, and this is pre-workout thing. You had a pretty lengthy interview with him. What is it that you like most about him as an individual and him as his game as it translates to the NBA?
Well, I'll start with him as an individual. He's got a lot of confidence, and there are some guys whose confidence comes off as maybe a little frustrating, because I'm like, okay, what have you actually done to accomplish it? But I think that he has a nice balance there, where he was co-conference player of the year, and he was the leading scorer in the conference. I thought he was one of college basketball's most prolific and best scorers. So it's not like it's unfounded for him. I think he's got a really good identity of who he is, where he comes from, what his strengths are, and what his weaknesses are. He knows he's not an elite athlete. And I think that's really what is really the NBA executives' biggest concerns on him too, is, he's got, high body fat percentage, right? He's somebody who, came to the game late. But I think that he understands that, and he knows that he's continuing to develop and change his body and become, a professional athlete. And that's something that I think is really, really important, is that awareness, that sort of, self-identification. And I think it's really helped his game form what it is today, as he watches guys like Luka and he watches guys like James Harden. And you can say you watch guys all you want, but when you actually implement them into your style, that's when I take an interest. And I think for me, the way he draws contact is very similar to James Harden. The way he can use his step back jumper is very similar to James Harden. I think he uses a lot of his disadvantages, his weaknesses, to become actually his most elite skill set. He's one of the best rim finishers in all of college basketball in recent memory. He can get to the rack like nobody else, I think, and really score at an elite pace in there, while also getting to the free throw line at an elite pace. And those are skills that, while they might not translate immediately to the NBA, I think long-term can make him a potentially elite scorer for years to come, because it's not that he was just running ISO in college, which is not going to translate as well to the NBA. He was doing quite a bit more than that.
We're talking with Bryan Kalbrosky from hoopshype.com here on Ruscin Zach. As far as his position goes, because we hear this all the time with different drafts, it's a deep year for for big guys or for point guards or whatever the position may be. What his position, that two guard spot, is this a deep year in the draft? Is it just, what's your assessment on that?
I would say it's a pretty deep year for guards. Yeah. I would say definitely it's a deep year for guards. But realistically, I mean, obviously, LaMelo Ball is probably the most discussed two guard in this draft. He's kind of a combo guard as well. I would say Killian Hayes is probably next in that. The French prospect is 6'5", kind of a similar thing. But there aren't too many two guards that I like a lot better. I can say with confidence that I like better than Mason Jones. I would say Anthony Edwards, playing in the same conferences as Mason Jones, has a ton of draft stock behind him. But Anthony Edwards was fairly underwhelming during his year at Georgia. I think that Devin Vassell is kind of more of a wing. Kira Lewis is more of a one. But beyond that, there aren't too many guys at the two guard who I think are better definitively than Mason Jones. I think Tyrese Maxey at Kentucky is kind of in that conversation. Tyrell Terry at Stanford in that conversation. Isaac Okoro from Auburn is in that conversation. But to me, I think Mason Jones is somebody who I think can really stand out. And when you talk about the two guards in this class, should be in that same tier as R.J. Hampton, Cassius Stanley. In terms of that whole group of guys, I think he's right there with them.
He declared early, and he sort of stuck to his guns, and then ultimately signed with an agent. Is this and then we saw a bunch of underclassmen start declaring after him, and it seems like everybody and their brother is declared for the NBA draft. Would he, in a perfect world or in a vacuum, maybe have benefited from coming back, or was his stock about as high as it was going to go?
It's interesting. He's somebody who I think had such a good season that it's hard to get a sense really of what he could have done better in college next year. And because he played in community college, and because he is a little bit older and came a little bit late into the game, it can be hard for a player like that to get significantly more draft stock when you're older, because a lot of times you want to see younger players. So he's at a nice mix right now of still young-ish without being, exactly raw. I think he can contribute. But one thing that I think is going to be really special about Mason is he's going to continue to develop his growth as well, because he's going to continue working on his body and becoming, closer to the NBA athlete that he knows he is. And he's not there yet, and that's why I have him as high as I do, is I think we're going to look back in 2 or 3 years and see him in much better shape than we've ever seen him. He recognizes that he used to be an overweight kid and wasn't an athlete, and he's kind of taken this life path to put his full strength and his full passion and the full idea of what the NBA could be to make it his mission. And I think, to me, I believe it when he says it. And so that's why I have him as high as I do. It's not just because of what he's done already, but what I think he's going to continue to do. And I think realistically, Mace is somebody who I think has a huge shot of getting a lot better. And that's a scary thought for me too. And that's why I have him as high as I do on my big board, is I think if he gets better, he's already such an amazing scorer. He already accomplished, so much at Arkansas in the last couple of years. 22 points, 5.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists per game, is pretty amazing. But he shot 75% at the rim, which is the best among all high major players who are 6'5" or shorter. That's for someone his size to finish that clip at the rim, that's amazing to me. But he also shot 14 for 24 from three-point range during the few games he played in March. So that's 58% from three, right when the season's starting to matter the most. So to me, that also speaks to the idea that he could be a shooter at the next level as well. Obviously, it's a small sample size because it was only in March, and things get different, in March, obviously. But I think that, he can become a better defender too. I think he really looks at someone like Jimmy Butler, and he sees what Jimmy Butler does as a defender, and he wants to be like that. And I think if he gets to be a better defender and a better 3-point shooter and becomes a 3-and-D guy who can also get to the rack, I mean, that's a special talent right there.
We're talking with Bryan Kalbrosky, hoopshype.com. In-depth interview with Mason Jones that Bryan did. You can read there at hoopshype.com. Bryan, when you watch Arkansas tape and you see Mason Jones, you obviously see the player wearing number 1. That's Isaiah Joe, who's also testing the NBA waters. What's your assessment of Isaiah Joe?
I mean, Isaiah Joe's a good player as well. I think he's going to have an NBA future one day. I think, Muss and the rest of the staff have developed him to become closer to that talent as well. I think he just took a step back in his 3-point shooting this year in a way that, I think he'll need to capitalize on so that he's really at a spot that he's going to be an elite shooter when he's coming into the draft. I think you got to strike when the iron's hot. And right now for Isaiah, I don't think that the iron's hot, but I could see him coming back next year, being a 6'5" junior, putting up maybe 16 points a game or so, maybe even more. Being obviously with Moses Moody, the focal point of that offense with Mason Jones in the NBA. And I could see Isaiah Joe being a good player. He's really productive in the pick and roll. He's somebody that can really create as a ball handler in the pick and roll and score for himself. I think he's a good ISO player as well. He's somebody who's always really impressed me, when he's driving to the basket. And I think that he also has done pretty well for himself. Whenever he gets a shot, creating, at least in my experience watching him, off the dribble. I think that, he's much better shooting off the dribble than he is off the catch, which I think is really rare. The catch and shoot game is a lot easier than shooting off the dribble. But he was way more efficient shooting off the dribble than he was off the catch. His field goal percentage was 10 points better off the dribble than it was off the catch. And I think, for me, it's a big tell, because I think you're going to be able to get a lot better shooting off the catch over time, whereas the dribble, that's something that's way harder to teach. So I think with the ball in his hands more, he'll be able to create his own offense, and that's something that I think a lot of teams are going to like about him. And I think realistically, he's going to be, more of the main guy for Arkansas moving forward. I think he's going to be a high usage guy, and I think with his height and his shooting ability, if he gets back to where he was after his freshman year when he tested the waters originally, I think he's going to become an NBA player, probably a first-round talent in the future.
For a guy like Isaiah Joe, this process with everybody that's sort of put their name into the draft, is this just more about getting the feedback to find out what the NBA GMs and what the scouts think of you?
I think that's got to play a big role in it. I think realistically, he's somebody that maybe could have actually been drafted higher as a one-and-done guy than after his sophomore year. I don't think he is somebody who they'd be looking at in the first round anymore. Whereas after his freshman year, after he was such an efficient shooter, especially on spot-up possessions and especially coming off screens and off the pick and roll. He's somebody who I think got a lot of scouts excited after his freshman year. His jump shot ranked 88th percentile in the nation, just straight up, and then off the dribble, 97th percentile as a freshman. As a sophomore, now he's a little bit older, and his numbers took a step back. And I think that now he's a little like the fact that he's older makes him less of a first-round talent, and the numbers didn't back it up as much. So I think another year at Arkansas would go a long way for him to get him back to those numbers, and I think he could potentially be a first-round talent coming after his junior year because by that point he'll be more polished. So I think as a freshman, you see something that's raw, you want to gravitate towards it because he's young, you can develop that in an NBA system. And then as a sophomore, he needs more work, but I think as a junior, and now he's a different kind of prospect. Now he's closer to being an NBA-ready player. And I think, he's going to hear a lot of that feedback when he talks to the executives and he gets the feedback from the folks around the league who really study his game. I know that he has a lot of fans, though. I think Isaiah Joe is somebody that I think a lot of people really do like. I think, for me, he came into the season as somebody who I think projected as a first-round talent. I think just as the season went on, he dropped, but I think from, probably last July, I would say, until maybe December. So maybe even January, he's somebody that I think NBA teams had circled in the first round. Now I'd say he's closer to mid-second if he were to get drafted. I don't think he would go undrafted, but I think for me, he's no longer a first-round talent. And I think, I think he wants to be a first-round talent, and I think that's how he came into this year. I think he can get back to that spot with a little bit more polish.
Bryan, what do you think of the Last Dance that everyone has been glued to every Sunday night here the last few weeks?
I mean, it's hard not to watch it. It's the closest thing we have to live sports, right? The whole community of basketball is rallying around it. I love it. I really have been enjoying watching it. I've got one roommate who doesn't really follow basketball, and he didn't watch the first episode. Kind of caught me watching it, and now he's been watching every week too. And I think realistically, especially for younger players that I've been talking to, I've been interviewing a lot of the draft prospects. I talked to one guy today, and he was like, "Man, I was born in 2000. Like, I don't know much about Michael Jordan. Obviously, I've heard the name. I know all about it, that he's really great, but I'm learning so much about his competitive nature and his drive." And you think about where this younger generation, when this younger generation was born, different time period, and I think you really get a chance to learn so much about a guy like MJ through this. So I think it's really great. I think, obviously Ken Burns, the great documentarian that he is, pointed out a very fair flaw in the process of that, and that MJ played such a huge role in the production of it. And then, the footage belongs to MJ, so it's kind of hard to get a fair shot at him. But, I don't think it's very objective journalism, but I think it's riveting. I think it's really entertaining.
Yeah. All right. Bryan Kalbrosky, hoopshype.com. Big profile there, big interview with Mason Jones that you can check out. Reading through it, as we've talked about here, Mason very candid and honest about his basketball journey. Bryan, thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, anytime. I'm looking forward to it, and maybe we can circle back again when Mason lands on an NBA team.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bryan and all our guests join us here on the Williams Tractor Hotline here on Ruscin and Zach.
Y'all get all that?